Well, I'm thrilled to introduce the very first experience we're having here with a manufacturer giving us their feedback on the economic model. So, my thanks to Vera for being here for that, for offering their perspective of how they saw some of the, probably, I'm anticipating, some of the issues we were just talking about and what was challenging at times for modeling this disease. And so, it's my pleasure to hand it on over.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning. My name is Jay Jackson. I'm Vice President of Health Economics and Outcomes Research at Vera Therapeutics. Before I start, I want to acknowledge the clinical experts, the modeling team, patient representatives, and the reviewers who contributed to the assessment of B-cell directed therapies for IgAN. Sarah, as you mentioned, I'm going to speak around a lot of those topics that were just being discussed, but just point out a few in particular from our perspective. So, starting off with modeling a chronic heterogeneous disease like IgAN is inherently challenging. Long-term randomized data is limited, progression is variable, and cross-trial comparisons require structural assumptions. The ICER model attempts to translate patients' lived experiences into transition probabilities in health states. As the panel considers the results in today's voting questions, I want to highlight a few major concerns on our side. My comments focus on how certain assumptions meaningfully influence projected long-term outcomes. First, baseline progression. The model's long-term progressions are anchored on transition probabilities derived from a study cohort enriched for progression. As a result, the modeled base case population progresses to ESKD relatively quickly compared with broader natural history cohorts. This matters because when treatment effects are layered onto population assumed to decline rapidly, long-term projections become highly sensitive to that starting trajectory. If baseline kidney function decline is faster than what many patients experience in routine practice, the model will reach ESKD sooner and incremental life years gain will appear smaller. Second, the face validity of the 17.06 ESKD estimate for atacicept. The model, as you saw, projects patients treated with atacicept to reach ESKD in 17 years. This conservative estimate implies an effective annual eGFR decline of 2 to 3 times faster than the annual decline observed in our clinical trials and long-term extension data for atacicept. If a therapy meaningfully stabilizes kidney function, and that gets it back to a healthy kidney, per the discussion earlier, and the stabilization persists, one expects a substantially longer delay to ESKD, potentially extending beyond a patient's natural lifetime in some cases. The discrepancy between observed slope and model time to ESKD warrants careful examination of how transition probabilities and calibration multipliers are applied. Finally, value beyond stage transitions. It's important to recognize that some meaningful humanistic disease impacts of IgAN and potential treatment benefits are not fully captured in the current model. Because of data limitations, the model focuses on long-term CKD stage transitions, but the value of therapy in IgAN does extend beyond delay in dialysis and transplant as well. IgAN affects many patients in early adulthood. Stabilizing kidney function can help preserve employment, independence, reduce caregiver burden years before kidney failure occurs. The day-to-day symptom burden, psychosocial impact, and lived experience of irregular systemic steroid exposure are not directly reflected in stage-based utilities. So in closing, we appreciate the difficulty in modeling a hypothetical IgAN cohort, especially given the disease modification potential of a product like atacicept that is demonstrated in our clinical trial program thus far. Our comments are intended to contextualize how baseline progression assumptions and calibration methods may underestimate the long-term clinical impact of sustained eGFR stabilization. Given the progressive nature of IgAN and the age of affected patients, careful attention to structural modeling assumptions is essential to ensure that projected value aligns with clinical reality. Our comments are provided to help contextualize the limitations of the model results, and we ask that the CTAF members to strongly consider during the voting session. Thank you.
Jay, thank you very much. We really appreciate having this type of manufacturer feedback on our economic model. We've welcomed it before, and we appreciate that you took the opportunity. I'd first like to see if Brett or any of the CTAF or any of the ICER, sorry, modelers had any comments about this, but I also open it up to questions to the whole panel, and we can perhaps continue some of the discussion we were having before.
Yeah, I'll start. Thanks, Dr. Jackson, for the comments. A lot were consistent with the original draft report, which we did address in a lot of ways. I think the first point is it would be great if folks would participate in submitting data. We did ask you for data, and you did not submit that data. That could have helped us with the baseline progression and understanding different populations. Dr. Rin just spoke about this, that our population, I explicitly called this out, that a lot of the patients start in that 3A, 3B, and you had an opportunity to counter that evidence for us to model atacicept directly, and you did not submit that data. The other thing to note, we actually did include caregiver burden in the lost productivity estimates. That's embedded in there. And the other piece I think I just want to highlight, and I really tried to put in the slides and tried to speak to it. The incremental effects are big, and I think we've already had this discussion that 6 life years gained, 5 years of perfect health. These are big effects. If you've been on and seen ISO reviews, these are very dramatic, and I worry that the messaging of the model's wrong or it's not valid or there's a lot of uncertainty kind of minimizes the impact for patients potentially, that if these effects turn out true, even if we're underestimating them, these are dramatic. And when we modeled a flat slope, which was the tornado diagram of the upper effect from the confidence interval, that flat slope produced about 10 years incremental of life years gained, and it still didn't break a 500,000 per EVLY. So I think that's a difficult message, and I think at least what the model shows is the potential effects are really great, and the potential is very. There's a lot of innovation here that's happening.
Uh, do you want to go ahead, Jay, or I was going to, David's next, but if you want to address
I'll just do
that.
it real quick. I appreciate those comments, and we understand and appreciate that the benefits that it's showing. We just feel like it's greater, and I understand in context of the other conditions as well, we should be considering that, and I think that's an important point. There are some there are some data limitations that we have because of the time and place we are in our clinical trial program. So we wish we could have shared some additional data earlier on. Maybe that would be something we could do in the future, but we weren't able to just because of where we are at in our program. But I appreciate those comments.
David.
Yeah, I just want to comment beyond even what Brett just said. If it's enriched for later stage disease, that means people will get to end stage kidney disease sooner in the control arm, and so it looks better than is real. If it, particularly in the situation in which we assume a level slope where your drug stops progression, it's not making it look worse. It's making it look better sooner because people otherwise in the control arm are getting to renal failure faster. So I think you're judging this in the wrong direction. I think that we're making it look better by picking later stage patients, and you can see that in the arm where progression is stopped and you're still not getting below $500,000 per equal value life year.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. I would respectfully look at it differently. If patients are treated earlier and their kidney function is stabilized, then they're at 1 ml/min, and then there's many years of life extended. If they're later in stage, they're already progressed so far, they only have so much left kidney function and to give. So even though you're stabilizing kidney function, you're so far along, you're getting there you're faster than you would. And I think some of that is happening in the model.
Well, I don't think that's the same argument. I think you're picking on a different argument there. I mean, I think what David is saying is that if the alternative is a really steep trajectory down and I'm modeling a flat slope, the benefit should be greater than if that really steep slope happened to be flatter because that group would have started earlier in the model. That was David's point. So regardless of early versus late in the model, the focus is the incremental gap in the health benefits. And in this case, the lower bound or the upper bound of that confidence interval is a flat slope, and the alternative is a dramatic decline. That would overestimate the benefit. Now, again, we understand we don't have your data, and maybe the answer is different if we did, but that's the early versus later, which we were very transparent. And I said this in the presentation that we're starting in this 3A, 3B. That's a different argument than what David was saying.
Yeah.
Two more comments, and then we'll move on. Bob.
I just want to take a moment to this opportunity here. The data that we're seeing on the drug looks good, on the treatment looks good. Patients are looking at a lifetime problem that they've known as a lifetime problem right from the instant it was told, if they were told. And it doesn't get better, it gets worse. So how long are you actually anticipating patients being on this treatment? I realize what your actual answers can be right now, but it certainly looks like a lifetime treatment, which I'm going to take this one opportunity to point out. Atacicept is one of the damnedest greatest drug treatment names I've ever heard of. So helpfully price it accordingly, considering the context that we're actually having this conversation in. I think that makes a huge damn difference to all of us in a more realistic way than we're talking around the circles here. Anyway, appreciate the opportunity and thank you very much for showing up. The number of times we wish the drug folks would come up and the number of times they do is truly impressive that you're here.
Thanks, Bob. Say.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a question to, I don't know who this is a question to, but kind of would, I feel like oftentimes in these studies, the manufacturers are very good at identifying a subset of the target population that is at especially higher risk. It allows them to have smaller studies that are more economical to run. And it always makes me nervous when we are applying that data to a larger population. And generally, it's going to be at a lower risk of, I think in this case, what I'm worried about is that what we're applying kind of rates of progression that may be selected for a higher risk population, and it may be slower when applied to a larger IgA nephropathy population. And I was wondering if folks could remark on how that would affect the economic analysis.
Well, I mean, I think what you're asking is there a lot of heterogeneity? There probably is. And that's true. We don't have the data, and I said that in the presentation, we don't have patient level data. I think there are scenarios where you can look at these could be pretty high value therapies. I mean, take a walk with me for just a few seconds. I know we're kind of limited on time, but let's just say on average, it's $15,000 per month for dialysis. Let's just take an average between the two. I'm just going to do this on my phone calculator. $180,000 per year times 5 years, $900,000. Okay. If you were to apply the price for that same 5 years, it's 1.5, just under 1.5 million. So despite completely eliminating the need for dialysis in this perfect example, you still are adding, $500,000 or so to the health system costs, or more, 600 some thousand. Even if you were to add at the tail end of that year, let's just say in that case you add a transplant, you're still adding health system costs. So now that doesn't include mortality, that doesn't include quality of life, that doesn't include any of the comparisons. That's why we do the model, right? Because we show these different trade-offs. So I really have to stress these benefits are so big. Really think we should be talking about the price. I mean, this is innovation in action that we're seeing. And I think it should be a benefit to all the companies participating that an independent assessment found the potential for this to be incredibly beneficial. And now we're just down to what's the fair price from the ICER's framework perspective. That's the way I interpret this.
Great. Thanks, Brett, and thanks everyone for a really rich discussion. We're going to move on to a very important part of our meeting, the public comments and discussions. We have 4 speakers. Just to remind each speaker, you have 5 minutes. Please introduce yourself and any potential conflict of interest before delivering your remarks. And then we will have a very brief period after the speakers if we want to ask specific questions. And we'll start with Susan Brizendine from Nephcure. Is Susan on?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, great. Thank you,
Hi.
Susan.
Thank you for having me. Yes, my name is Susan Brizendine. I'm with Nephcure. We're a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving health access and outcomes for people living with rare protein spilling kidney diseases. We have about 60% of our funding from public health companies, 40% from individual donations. Among those public health companies funding us are included in this review, Calliditas, Vera, and Outska. Thank you for the opportunity to address this forum. We definitely applaud ICER for shining an important light on IgA nephropathy and for soliciting community input to inform this assessment and whole process. We really do appreciate it. We do agree with many of ICER's conclusions, and we understand that cost effectiveness is an important consideration in selecting a therapy without question. However, we are concerned that the ICER review may create additional barriers to access. An outcome that will result in further delayed treatment and kidney disease progression. And based upon what was discussed today, those delays may be based on a wrong model. We view this interim assessment as fundamentally flawed, incomplete, and in direct conflict with medical evidence and established guidance from medical experts and regulatory authorities. And so I can explain that. We think it's flawed given the Institute's use of systemic steroids as a comparator to novel advanced therapies. We've extensively studied these new medicines. They're FDA-approved therapies that demonstrate efficacy and safety. And high dose, which is how they are typically used, systemic steroids are not an FDA-approved therapy for IgAN. Their use in this setting has been extensively adjudicated and ruled against by the leading academic and regulatory authorities. So the KDIGO clinical practice guideline recommends using disease-modifying agents as first-line therapy. The FDA and NICE have rejected the inclusion of steroids as a comparator and the use of steroids in IgAN. We also believe this interim report is incomplete given the absence of eGFR outcomes data for the advanced disease-modifying therapies. I mean, certainly we acknowledge the need for real-world evidence, but that evidence will remain elusive if clinicians don't prescribe these therapies. And further, we can't underestimate the impact, as we've talked a lot about today, of long-term systemic steroid use on patient and caregiver quality of life. Remember, not all steroids are the same. I know you know this, but in IgAN patients, systemic steroids are again administered at high doses typically. They often cause these life-altering and devastating side effects: swelling, weight gain, muscle, bone, joint damage, irritability, moodiness, aggressiveness, and infertility. So we urge ICER, please consider these issues and work toward a more complete, updated guidance that reflects the totality of clinical evidence and expert opinion. Nephcure and the IgAN Alliance will help lead the IgAN community and its stakeholders to the best decisions for patients, guided by the evidence and expert consultation. The voice that matters the most, though, is the voice of the patient, which we are honored to represent. But let me share some patients' thoughts in their own words. These are quotes from the Voice of the Patient report on the externally led patient-focused drug development meeting on IgA nephropathy. Quote 1, I have body aches, especially with the residual side effects of prednisone treatment 6 years ago, torn muscles, joint aches. The tearing of muscle led to missing work, physical therapy, as well as pain I felt from simple things, even walking. Quote 2, prednisone has altered my life so much that I didn't want to burden anyone. I stayed alone being single for 8 years. I isolated myself because of the effects of prednisone, and sometimes I wonder, what if I didn't take it? Quote 3, I've had an 80-pound weight gain due to prednisone, and now I can't get rid of it. I have an irregular heartbeat. One day it's tachycardia, next day it's bradycardia, next day I'm having AFib. Quote 4, for me, the biggest thing in future therapy would be to have disease management without the use of steroids. The use of prednisone with the amount of side effects that come with it is unfortunate. And patients continue sharing with us. Just this week, we heard from a patient who told us, I was to be on prednisone for a minimum of 18 months. It was terrible because of all the side effects. I gained over 50 pounds and could not control my diabetes. The worst part was I was so grumpy, I thought my 50-year marriage was going to end. My husband, in my eyes, could not do anything correct, and I yelled at him constantly. I don't think it was worth it. I took it for a year. And finally, my personal experience with high-dose steroids was an absolutely miserable time in my IgAN journey. I had many side effects such as severe weight gain over 30 pounds, muscle weakness, joint discomfort, and insomnia. This was the only option at the time. I was given the steroids for 6 months, and I'm very happy there are many other options now for patients with IgAN, as high-dose steroids are not the answer. So that's the voice of the patient. That's who we're advocating for. We're here to help save kidneys without delay. So thank you for your consideration.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan, for that perspective. We will wait and maybe have comments at the very end and questions of our 4 public speakers, just in the interest of time, if that's okay. Sarah, is that okay?
I was gonna actually I think David and Jason wanted to specifically address some Susan's comments. I think it might be appropriate to do it now. Thank you.
Go for it, Jason. And
I just, thank you for your comments. I guess I just want to be very clear about this, as we were clear in the response to review from the companies that, provide funding to your organization, that we do not doubt at all. None of us who practice clinical medicine doubt that systemic glucocorticoids have terrible side effects. There's no doubt about that at all. We have also heard from patients, and this is borne out by trial data, for example, that Nefcon has some of these side effects. I'll point that out too. And some of the same comments that you're making from patients also told us that they had the weight gain, the diabetes, the changes in mood. Nefcon also has those side effects. With respect to the dose of steroids, I defer to the clinical experts, but if high-dose systemic glucocorticoids are used in clinical practice, I have absolutely no idea why people are using those doses, because it's quite clear from the testing trial that the lower dose is as effective as the higher dose with much, much less side effects. So I can't speak to your claim that the higher dose is used in clinical practice, but I don't understand how anyone would do that in an evidence-based way. The up-to-date guidelines prefer systemic glucocorticoids over Nefcon. We don't know how that new agents are going to get into that, but I think patients deserve clear answers about comparative effectiveness evidence. And no one doubts the side effects of steroids, but I think they deserve the best evidence about all the choices, and whether Nefcon has this much more or that much more side effects than systemic glucocorticoids, to me seems like, and is there a comparative efficacy difference, seems like an important question that patients deserve to know the answer to.
Jason, do you mind if I just make a comment, please? Up to date is written by 3 nephrologists. It is a personal view on their treatment of IgA nephropathy. It is not evidence-based. It is an opinion-based guideline that cannot be compared with the KDIGO process. And I think that really needs to be highlighted here. It is the opinion of 3 or 4 nephrologists. That's it. It's their view on how to treat disease.
I was just going to say, because many people probably don't know what UpToDate is. UpToDate is a very comprehensive, widely referenced by physicians clinical guidance on all problems, not just IgA nephropathy, but it is very widely used by physicians, and it is written by different people who write different chapters. And in theory, they are doing that with a combination of access to the evidence that's available as well as their opinion, as John was saying. But it is widely used by physicians. David.
I'll avoid going to the up-to-date discussion for the moment, as the former head of evidence for up-to-date. But staying away from that, I want to point out that we have a scenario analysis that you all can see in table 4.7 in our report that looks at what the cost effectiveness is compared to no systemic therapy. And it's a red herring to think that the results we're getting are due to using systemic steroids as a comparator. Nefecon actually has worse cost effectiveness compared to no therapy than it does compared to steroids. The other two are essentially identical. So I just want Susan to understand that the results we got are not because we compared to steroids. And I can understand the concern on the comparative effectiveness, not that ICER is in any way trying to recommend to any individual patients whether they should or should not take systemic steroids. That's something for clinicians looking at KDIGO guidelines, other guidance to make in discussions with patients about what to do. But in terms of cost effectiveness, when we compare to no systemic therapy, the cost effectiveness of Nefecon is a little bit worse, and the other two is exactly the same. The results were not driven by the choice of steroids as a comparator.
Thanks for clarifying, David. Real quick, Rita is the last one because we have 3 other commenters.
I was just going to comment, and certainly those are important issues about adverse effects for the drug treatments that we're looking at. But I also would suggest a barrier to patients is something you could perhaps address with the funders of your group, which is the cost of the drug.
Thank you. Our next commenter is Kurt Campbell from the University of Pennsylvania.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak. I'm the chief of the renal division at Penn, and I'm also on the board of the NephCure Foundation, and I've received consultancy fees from Calditas, Vera, Otsuka, Novartis, and AstraZeneca. So I'll be talking a bit about my own perspective and certainly not sharing statements that might be new today, just really emphasizing some key points. Just the fact from the patient perspective that there are a lot of uncertainties that they face when they're told they have the diagnosis of IgA nephropathy. They often feel well, but they have questions pertaining mostly to their kidney function, right? Will it drop? Am I going to need dialysis? What does it mean for my insurance, pregnancy, etc.? And we have to also really emphasize the key point that we do not have regenerative therapy, right? We cannot replace lost kidney function. We can only slow the decline in patients who have a decrease in their kidney function. So beyond optimizing supportive measures with blood pressure management and reducing cardiovascular risk, etc., steroids are really the mainstay, right, for decades. And so patients, as we've heard from many stakeholders today, have a lot of questions and concerns about systemic corticosteroid use that are shared by clinicians, right? Even shorter courses of steroids we know will increase the risk of infections, mood changes, weight gain, etc. A lot of metabolic complications around diabetic susceptibility and bone loss. So patients really want to have options that are tailored to their individual intrinsic clinical status. And we have to really appreciate the heterogeneity of IgA nephropathy and empower clinicians to have informed decision-making with their patients to treat patients with the appropriate drug that's likely to benefit them. And I think that's what we really want to have from the clinical perspective. And that's what some of these advanced therapies really offer us, right? We have agents that are more targeted to specific disease mechanisms, more kidney specific, and varying degrees of proteinuria reduction and slowing progression and eGFR decline. We can individualize therapy. We can respect patient quality of life. We can tease out those who are not good candidates for steroids. And then a patient that I saw recently in my practice, when I'm very concerned about the GFR decline in a short period of time, I can prioritize agents that have been shown to be more promising for the GFR stabilization on an individualized basis. So there's a lot of relief that we've had so much innovation in this space, and that we don't have to be forced to employ therapies that might have a negative impact on certain patients' mental health, metabolic health, ability to function. But the major concern is access, right? Access to these novel therapies that have shown promise and have a tolerable safety profile, because patients face a lot of barriers in routine kidney care, right? Limited specialist availability, transportation challenges, time out of work, high out-of-pocket expenses. So adding on what typically happens with these newer therapies with prior authorizations and repeated documentation requirements, the eligibility thresholds, requirements for step therapy, appeals processes, this all takes time, right? And this has an impact on overall prognosis, because any delay will potentially lead to a further decline in kidney function until these optimal therapies are applied. So the concern is that we're not creating additional barriers that our colleagues in biomedical research development industry have helped with all this innovation with. So we want to make sure we have policies that really incentivize exceptional care delivery to get to our ultimate clinical goal. So step therapy, for example, may look reasonable on paper, but it can limit access disproportionately to patients with fewer resources, less ability to navigate the appeals process, and less flexibility to follow up with their clinician. So the ask is really straightforward as we evaluate these advanced therapies for IgA nephropathy. Want to make sure that any value framework or policy recommendations don't unintentionally translate into mandatory step edits, one-size-fits-all restrictions, burdensome access hurdles that delay care, because really there's a crucial need to preserve room for clinician judgment, right? Shared decision making, recognizing that protecting kidney function is more than a clinical outcome. It's really essential to maintaining patient independence. So for this, again, truly heterogeneous condition that we now have excellent tools to treat patients with. So thank you for listening, and looking forward to continuing this discussion.
Thank you very much, Kirk. Any comments or questions before we move on? If not, we will move on to Steve Risk from Veloxis.
All right, great. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. And I want to thank the ICER team for having me here today. I'm Steve Risk. I'm the Senior Vice President of Medical Affairs at Calliditas and Veloxis, both member companies of the Asahi Kasei Corporation. Calliditas and Veloxis are committed to improving the lives of people with rare diseases like IgAN by delivering innovative disease-modifying treatments. And we're encouraged that ICER selected IgAN for review to help bring attention to the burden of disease faced by people living with IgAN. We especially want to thank all the patients, patient advocates, and clinical experts who shared their experiences and perspectives with ICER during the review and in today's meeting. Your input has been essential to ensure that the review reflects the needs and priorities of those most affected by IgAN. And to the people living with IgAN, we know very well that you have been underserved for decades. Until recently, there have been limited treatment options, which consisted primarily of supportive care and immunosuppressants. These treatments lack disease-modifying potential, and some are associated with serious adverse events. With systemic glucocorticoids being a particular focus in ICER's report and the discussions thus far today, we believe it's important to fully contextualize the role of systemic glucocorticoids in current IgAN management. So Dr. Wasi and others spoke a bit about KDIGO and UpToDate. I just want to touch on this. KDIGO is an international clinical practice guideline body that generates formal evidence-based recommendations. Now, compared to other clinical practice guides, such as UpToDate, the KDIGO guidelines follow a transparent, formal, and rigorous process to review evidence and generate consensus recommendations. As mentioned, the latest KDIGO guidelines only recommend systemic glucocorticoids for the treatment of IgAN in settings where Nefecon is not commercially available. Systemic glucocorticoids are therefore a limited treatment option for IgAN patients where Nefecon is not commercially available. The available evidence related to systemic glucocorticoids mainly come from the STOP IgAN and testing trials, as mentioned earlier in this discussion. And the KDIGO guidelines show that systemic glucocorticoids do not have any benefits on kidney function. As mentioned by the previous speakers, and in particular, Ms. Brezendine's presentation, systemic glucocorticoids are associated with a range of significant and well-known adverse events, such as serious infections, gastrointestinal bleeding, metabolic, cosmetic, neuropsychiatric side effects, which negatively impact patients' health and quality of life. With the exciting new class of therapies being reviewed today, including Nefecon, people with IgAN no longer need to risk the potential harmful effects of high-dose systemic glucocorticoids. About Nefecon, it's a once-daily oral targeted release capsule, and it's the first FDA-approved therapy demonstrated to reduce the loss of kidney function in adults with primary IgAN at risk of disease progression. Full FDA approval was granted by health authorities based on the proven benefit-risk profile and its ability to stabilize GFR decline with a 9-month treatment course in a 2-year study. The available evidence indicates that Nefecon has selective immunomodulatory mechanism of action and direct disease-modifying effects in patients with IgAN, while having low systemic exposure and adverse events, while consistent with systemic glucocorticoids, determined to be safe and efficacious by the health authorities. No other glucocorticoid has been able to achieve such an indication. These findings are reflected in the KDIGO guidelines, which recommend Nefecon be considered as a first-choice treatment. And for this, we're very proud of the investment we made in the IgAN community. As of July 2025, more than 13,000 patient years of exposure with Nefecon has been achieved, and there's been no change to the established safety profile for Nefecon. In summary, this is a wonderful new day for people living with IgAN. The available evidence and current clinical guidelines suggest that systemic glucocorticoids were not sufficiently addressing the needs of the patient community. And so therefore, Calliditas and Veloxis remain committed to the IgAN community to ensure that the recommendations are based on evidence and reflect the diverse experiences and needs of all patients. So thank you again to the ICER team, the clinical and patient communities for bringing attention to this critical topic and for providing me the opportunity to speak on behalf of Calliditas and Veloxis during this exciting time for patients. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve, for those comments. Any questions specifically for Steve or comments before we move on to our final speaker, who is final public commenter, Robert Brenner, who is with Vera Therapeutics.
Good afternoon, and thank you to ICER, to the clinicians who are here today, and especially to the patients and caregivers who have joined this discussion. My name is Robert Brenner. I'm a nephrologist, and I serve as Chief Medical Officer at Vera Therapeutics. I want to begin by acknowledging what brings us here today. IgA nephropathy is not an abstract diagnosis. It is a lifelong burden carried by young adults, parents, professionals, people who often look healthy on the outside while living with the steady uncertainty of kidney function that may decline year after year. For them, GFR is not just a number. It represents time before dialysis, time before transplant, time to live fully. At Vera, we began our work in IgA nephropathy in 2020 with a simple but ambitious belief that by harnessing the power of biologic understanding, we can lift the burdens of disease and illuminate the path to healing. Atacicept, a rationally designed dual BAFF/APRIL inhibitor, is intended to address the upstream immune dysregulation of IgA nephropathy. Rather than attempting to blunt the consequences of kidney damage after it occurs, we set out to try and intervene at its source. Over the past several years, that belief has been tested through rigorous clinical development. The results we have generated are consistent, biologically coherent data, demonstrating meaningful reductions in proteinuria and data suggesting stabilization of kidney function over time. These findings have been peer-reviewed and published in the leading journals in nephrology and medicine. The strength of this evidence reflects more than statistical outcomes. It reflects a sustained and reproducible effect aligned with the mechanism of action and a clinical program executed deliberately and transparently. And yet today's evaluation occurs before the full maturation of long-term phase 3 GFR data that will further clarify the impact of atacicept on the course of disease. GFR is the currency of kidney preservation. A comprehensive judgment of value must consider long-term outcomes. Assessing value with a partial phase 3 data set will undoubtedly underestimate what sustained stabilization of kidney function could truly mean. Because IgA nephropathy cannot be reduced to model alone. A cursory assessment may quantify proteinuria changes and projected cost offsets, but it cannot fully measure the relief of a patient who sees their kidney function hold steady. It cannot quantify the reduced anxiety for a caregiver who no longer worries whether he or she will be a match for a kidney transplant. It cannot capture the preservation of careers, family roles, or independence. Those benefits are real, even if they resist precise calculation. The FDA granted breakthrough therapy to atacicept in 2024, as well as priority review for the biologics license application that was submitted in November of 2025. These recognitions reflect not hope alone, but confidence grounded in data. To patients and families, we see your courage. Our commitment has always been to deliver science and medicine that earns your trust. To physicians, we respect the responsibility you carry in guiding treatment decisions. Our goal is to provide evidence that is rigorous, transparent, and clinically meaningful. And to the Vera team, your dedication has transformed an idea into a body of evidence strong enough to reshape conversations about what is possible in IgA nephropathy. Atacicept represents a belief that by precisely targeting disease biology, we can potentially stabilize kidney function and change the long-term outlook for people living with this condition. Thank you for the opportunity to share our perspective, and I encourage your open-mindedness to what meaningful innovation can bring to people living with IgA nephropathy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Robert, and thank you so much to all of our public speakers. Go ahead, David has a comment.
I just had a question for Dr. Brenner. If I was understanding you correctly, it sounded like you felt that it was inappropriate for ICER to be doing the review without the GFR data and only looking at the proteinuria data. And so I was wondering whether you all are planning to try to get accelerated approval based on the proteinuria data, or you're going to wait for the GFR data and only apply for full approval?
Well, we engage with the regulators and follow a pathway that the regulators set out for sponsors. The interim analysis that uses proteinuria as the key endpoint for accelerated approval is not the only data that regulators have seen. And so the regulators will ultimately be the arbiters of what data they include under an accelerated review timeline versus full approval. Vera's focus is to generate a comprehensive data package that includes both proteinuria and GFR. And over the long term, we are confident that the GFR results are what matters most to patients.
We completely agree, but presumably if this gets accelerated approval, patients and doctors will need to make decisions without those data, right?
Well, there is data in the public domain already. So there's 2-year open label extension data with atacicept showing that a GFR slope in a population of patients with a biopsy-proven kidney ailment is similar to a healthy 40-year-old. That is about 1 ml per minute per year. We're also collecting those data in the ongoing phase 3 study.
Great. Thank you again to all the commentators and for bringing in the patient perspective. And we hope to hear after lunch a little bit more from our patient experts as well when we go through the voting questions. We're running a little behind, but we will start again on time at 11:55 a.m. Pacific time after the lunch break. Thank you, everyone, for a very engaging discussion this morning.